There is no way that they actually do this. As a brand new shocking report has dropped linking the Toronto Maple Leafs to a defenseman that has Leafs fans absolutely fired up. We're going to break down these reports as things are starting to escalate and come to fruition very, very soon. Stay tuned for all that in this episode. We also have multiple updates ahead of tonight's game against the Dallas Stars. Stay tuned, but before we get into it, a quick reminder, before we get into all that, if you're part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. We're on the road to 15,000 subscribers. If you enjoy the daily content, this is the place to be. But Darius, no one expected this here this morning, and it is surrounding a former Toronto Maple Leaf from last year that a lot of us are familiar with, and it seems like the Leafs are potentially looking at a reunion here with John Klingberg. Ex-Leaf John Klingberg is nearing a return to the NHL. The Maple Leafs, the Senators, and the Oilers are among teams showing interest. A decision is expected within the next 2 weeks. Klingberg with the Leafs underwent hip resurfacing surgery in 2023 and has been working towards a comeback with 5 to 7 teams reportedly in the mix. Sorry, and we do have another report I'll get to in a minute here, but I just want to get your thoughts on this, Derek. I mean, John Klingberg, he was good for a bit. They signed him last year to a pretty hefty deal. Not crazy, but hefty considering the production he gave. And then they got sent to Rubbermaid Island. So, I mean, clearly the Leafs are ready to go here.
Well, it was $4 million. So it was a bit of a hefty contract. And obviously they got out from under it with the LTIR space. But this is weird. This is weird. He is working out in Toronto, and he looks like he's getting back to skating here, which is good news for him as a player. If he makes an NHL comeback, I think that's a great story. We saw with Matt Murray, we saw with Patrick Kane. Both guys had hip surgery, which would render you, maybe retiring in the past, right? But not the case anymore. And I think this would be a great story. But where does he fit with the Leafs? I mean, the Leafs already signed this year John Klingberg 2.0 and Yanni Hakanpää from the Dallas Stars too, right? So they're trying to work that out. So I don't know if this makes sense for the Leafs. Maybe it's an option that they add in case there's some injuries. But in terms of where the Leafs want to go and what they want to accomplish, I don't think John Klingberg is the answer anymore for this team. So it is pretty interesting. But of course, the Sens and the Oilers also linked to him. But nonetheless, it's a great story. I hope he does make a return to the NHL, but where does he fit with the Leafs? I don't know if he does.
Yeah, and again, he's a offensive-minded defenseman. They have OEL now as well, and obviously OEL is a significantly better player at this point, but when it comes to what Brad Shirley envisioned John Klingberg being last year, OEL this year has done that at least a lot better than John Klingberg did initially. And something interesting here is that Klingberg has been skating and working out in Toronto in hopes of his return to the NHL. And he played in Toronto last year, and multiple teams are interested in him, 5 to 7 teams according to Darren Dreger. So the Leafs blue line situation is interesting. Could he be a better option than who they have in the third pairing, whether that be Connor Timmins? They're going to keep Benoit in there. Obviously, they have Yanni Hakanpää as well. And I mean, if they sign John Klingberg, you would assume that, I mean, the Yanni Hakanpää situation wouldn't, come to fruition when it comes to him actually playing games, because they are we've been talking about how they're backloaded on the blue line. That being said, and you mentioned it in the video yesterday or a couple days ago, even though they're backloaded, there still is a lot of room for, improvement here on the blue line as well. So it's very interesting, though I do not know if Brad Treliving is going to pull the trigger on this. It seems like they're interested. I'm quite frankly still shocked that this is even a consideration for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm curious. Let us know down below what your thoughts are on this. But Darius, any final thoughts on this? I'm just surprised, especially at this point of the year. Though it makes sense given their connection last season, how Brad Treliving obviously signed into that deal. And let's not forget, they worked closely, with the front office and John Klingberg to ensure that he, did his best with him last season despite his injuries and the unfortunate circumstances.
There's a world where this does make sense. If he comes in on a league minimum deal, again, I don't know if I want to bring this player in specifically to the Leafs and even try this again with where the Leafs are and where they want to be. But there's a world where it could make sense. League minimum, right? Bring him in. If there's an injury in the playoffs, this is a guy who's played in the playoffs before, has that experience instead of a guy from the Marlies or a guy with inexperience. So there's a world where it could work, but we'll see how it progresses. And I just think there's other teams on this list, and the fact that there's 5 to 7 teams involved that could use him, right? Other than the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and maybe he, just as the extra defenseman for when injuries or, load management. Marshall Rafai, maybe he replaces him down there because he hasn't gotten much playing time. So it'll be interesting to see. And Yanni Hakanpää, of course, replaces him. What happens there? But talking about some more injuries, Kyle Yarncroc, sports hernia, is skating again and staying around the team. Craig Berube says Yarncroc is still a while away from returning, but skated briefly yesterday. He added that they should have a better idea of his progress in 2 weeks. So he is, this is a name we thought he was going to start the season healthy. There was rumors of that in the preseason. He's been out now. We're over halfway through the season. I don't know where they're going to factor him in once he returns. We'll have an update in 2 weeks. Maybe he returns towards the end of the season, but you can't imagine if he returns towards the end of the season that they put him in the lineup for the playoffs or anything like that. So I don't know if the Cal Yarncroc boat is probably sailed for this season at least, but maybe he comes back in short order here in the next month or so and they try to get some reps in. And I guess a lot of it also depends on what they do with the trade deadline, how their depth is looking, depending on any deals that they make here.
I'm not so sure it's the last time we've seen Calle Yarncroke, honestly. I think it's the last time we've seen him as a Leaf in this regular season. I
Agreed.
don't think he can play the regular season, especially with the cap hit and everything like that. He's going to remain on LTIR until the playoffs. But come playoff time, we saw it last year with how many injuries they had. Nylander was out. Matthews was out, right? Bobby McMahon didn't get to play in the series. Injuries happen, especially as you go over the course of a playoff run. So there is a world where we can see him. Even if they add a couple pieces at the trade deadline, there's a world where we could see him. So I think they're just going to keep him around, have him skating, and we may see him in the playoffs. But it's not a situation where, game one of the playoffs, he comes back and he's in the lineup. That's not the case. There would have to be a lot of injuries for him to get in. But I think there is a world where we do see him this season in the playoffs.
Yeah, there is. I mean, we saw last season, we saw a bunch of injuries happen, so things are unexpected there. Talking about tonight's game a little bit, Dennis Hildeby is the only goalie at the Leafs optional skate, typically a sign that Wall is expected to start. So Joseph Wall is in net tonight, and this is a huge game tonight. And Craig Berube spoke out on Joseph Wall taking ownership after his bad game against Carolina last week. I like anybody who takes ownership of themselves and the team and things like that. That is important. And they're coming into a game tonight. They've lost 2 in a row. They need to win tonight's game. It's not like a must win because Florida lost yesterday to a very bad team. So it's like a lot of things are kind of to the Flyers. So a lot of things are going in Toronto's way standings wise. And now here they are with a chance to make some more ground up. And Craig Berube said we need a really solid hockey game for 60 minutes tonight. We need everybody. We can't have any passengers. And that's the big thing here. They need to play well. And let's hope we don't have another situation where they lose and then Mitch Marner applauds the effort in the post game. But Darius, a very big game tonight. Jake McCabe is at optional skate taking part. So no lines as of right now. But what are your thoughts on all this news and Jake McCabe as well here ahead of tonight's game?
We'll start with Jake McCabe. I mean, he's a great piece to this team. We're seeing it right now. He's such a valuable part of this team, and they desperately need him back. Not so sure he plays tonight, but I think we'll see him at some point this week. He's progressing well, which is a good thing. It doesn't sound like he was dealing with a concussion, but they were just, being proactive about anything, just making sure he wasn't getting into a game and he wasn't right. And if you can go back to the quote about, Craig Berube talking about Joseph Wall, again, I hate to read into this a little bit, but they haven't played a game since the quote against the Vancouver Canucks. I wonder if this is a bit of a shot at Mitch Marner, right? From the coach to Mitch Marner without directly saying anything, because Mitch Marner didn't take ownership or accountability of his play on Saturday. It was a terrible game where they did not execute. And he came out and said, it was a great game. We played well. I thought we executed in these areas, but they didn't. They didn't even score a goal. You lost to a team that got there a couple hours before the game. So it was a terrible quote in that way. So I wonder if this is a little bit of that. We saw with Sheldon Keefe saying things like this sometimes, and you had to roll them back. Craig Berube, maybe he's doing this without actually naming names, right? So I think this is the way that the Leafs have to be now, right? The coach calling out stuff like this. Guys like Wool saying, I wasn't great. Guys like Tanev saying, the team sucked tonight, right? Like, we need to be better. Holding each other accountable, stuff like that. That's the way it's got to be if you want to win a Stanley Cup. If you're going to go the other way, I don't know if that's a recipe for success or, if that'll work long term. So I wonder if that was Craig Berube doing a little bit of that.
Yeah, and also Ryan Reeves spoke out on fighting a little bit. Feel free to pause and read this through, basically saying he wants to fight, but other teams aren't fighting. The other week, and I asked Hathaway on the draw when we lined up. It was right after one of the fights. He said no. So, I mean, there's not many fighters anymore, and that's why Ryan Reeves hasn't been able to fight. And also, let's keep in mind, tonight is the game where we're going to see Steven Lorentz on the first line, Matthew Nyes on the second line. So a lot of storylines, along with, of course, the ridiculous John Klingberg report that we'll keep you up to date on, so make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we will be live following tonight's game against the Dallas Stars, so make sure you tune into that. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you later.